Forget Rome, forget Athens. For 3 centuries, the true epicenter of power and thought wasn't in Europe at all. It was a port city carved from the Egyptian desert, Alexandria. It was a testament to a grand viziona place where gold was secondary to the sheer, unadulterated power of the mind. The Ptolemies understood one thing: to truly rule the world, you had to control its information. They didn't just buy books according to ancient accounts, they issued a decree. Every ship docking in their harbor had to surrender any scroll for copying and indexing. Whether this happened as extensively as legend suggests is debated, but the ambition was real. They were building the first attempt at a universal repository of human knowledge. It was a research institute first, a library second. Scholars didn't just read, they were essentially government-funded researchers given lodging, meals and stipends. The Ptolemies didn't just preserve knowledge, they literally funded its creation and gathered the human brainpower needed to push civilization forward. But what revolutionary discoveries emerged from these halls? Coming up next, the brilliant minds who called this library home. It was right here that Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy, within just a few percent, simply by measuring shadows in different cities. It was here that Herophilus became the first to systematically dissect human cadavers, mapping the nervous system. And it was here that Archimedes developed principles of physics that wouldn't be matched for nearly 2 millennia. Just think of the sheer cost of this project. Every single scroll was a handwritten work, painstakingly copied by trained scribes. It wasn't just text, it was months of specialized labor. It was an institution declaring to the world, knowledge is our most precious resource. Here lay the most complete maps of the known world. Early atomic theories inherited from Democritus and the collected works of Greek drama. It was the single most comprehensive repository of everything humanity had achieved to that point. This golden age was fragile. In just a moment we reveal how Julius Caesar's military campaign in Egypt triggered the beginning of the end. The library became entangled in the politics of empire. In 48 BCE, when Julius Caesar pursued his rival Pompey to Alexandria and became embroiled in a local power struggle, the fire he set to destroy enemy ships in the harbor reportedly spread. Ancient sources tell us it reached warehouses near the docks, warehouses said to contain tens of thousands of scrolls awaiting shipment or cataloging. It wasn't the definitive end, but it was the first documented blow. What exactly burned that day remains a historical mystery. Some ancient writers claim the main library survived this incident relatively intact, but whether in that moment or through subsequent events, a vast amount of knowledge was lost. Historians still debate the timeline. Was it a single catastrophic fire or a gradual decline over centuries? It was a prolonged intellectual catastrophe. The library likely suffered multiple wounds over several centuries: fires, budget cuts, political upheavals, and eventually, ideological conflicts. By the 4th and 5th centuries CE, various religious and political authorities viewed pagan learning with suspicion. The result was the same. Centuries of accumulated human knowledge simply disappeared. But what precisely did we lose in those flames? Next, we explore what ancient sources tell us was there and what modern scholars theorize might have changed history. This is history's greatest what if. Ancient sources mention works we'll never read. Aristarchus's heliocentric theory, written 1800 years before Copernicus' advanced treatises on navigation and astronomy that could have enabled earlier long-distance sea voyages. But how advanced was Alexandria really? We know they had remarkable technology. The Antikythera mechanism proves ancient Greeks could build sophisticated astronomical calculators. Heron of Alexandria documented steam-powered devices, though used only as novelties, not industrial tools. The famous Baghdad battery clay jars have been debated. Were they actually galvanic cells or just storage vessels? Here's what we can say with confidence. Alexandria had the theoretical knowledge for many technologies that wouldn't be applied practically for centuries. They understood basic optics, mechanics, and chemistry. What they lacked wasn't knowledge. It was the economic and social conditions that would later drive the Industrial Revolution. But if those conditions had existed, the fragmentary references to advanced devices suggest they were much closer than we might think. The flames didn't just burn books, they burned potential. Not necessarily an industrial revolution in the 4th century, but perhaps one several centuries earlier than our 18th century breakthrough. The knowledge wasn't completely destroyed. It scattered after the break. We trace how Alexandria's surviving scrolls found sanctuary in unexpected places preserved by the very civilizations that Europe would later consider its rivals. The aftermath and dispersal, the flame keepers. With Alexandria's decline, the intellectual light of the Mediterranean began to dim. The knowledge didn't vanish entirely, but it became fragmented and inaccessible, scattered across a fragmenting world. In Western Europe, preservation fell almost entirely to Christian monasteries. Imagine a time when a single book could be worth a farm, and the ability to read Greek had nearly disappeared in the West. Monasteries became isolated intellectual outposts, painstakingly copying texts. Many monks didn't understand the scientific or philosophical content they were copying. They preserved these texts through sheer devotional labor, treating them as artifacts worthy of protection, regardless of comprehension. What survived was largely determined by chance and the priorities of religious institutions. The grand, critical scientific spirit of Alexandria was replaced by a narrower theological focus. Yet this humble, often thankless work kept the ember of ancient learning alive. That ember would be rekindled in the East. In a moment, we cross the sea to Constantinople, the walled city that became the guardian of Rome's intellectual legacy. While Western Europe struggled through political fragmentation, the Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, maintained direct continuity with the classical world. Greek remained the language of scholarship, and the knowledge of ancient Greece and Rome was not only preserved, but actively studied. Byzantium acted as a crucial firewall between the ancient world and the medieval one. Scholars there constantly engaged with classical texts, analyzing, commenting, annotating. They maintained the infrastructure of classical education for nearly 1,000 years after Rome's fall. Without Byzantine preservation, we would have lost far more. Byzantine scribes meticulously copied and recopied ancient manuscripts. They weren't producing revolutionary new science at the rate Alexandria once did, but their steady, quiet commitment to preservation created the essential bridge between antiquity and the coming Renaissance. Up next, how Baghdad became the intellectual heir to Alexandria and why their mathematical innovations, including the crucial concept of zero, became the foundation for modern science. In the 8th century, a new intellectual force emerged, the Islamic Golden Age, driven by religious teachings that encouraged the pursuit of knowledge. The Abbasid Caliphate made Baghdad a new center of learning. At its heart was the legendary House of Wisdom. The caliphs funded an unprecedented translation movement, while the famous story of paying scholars the weight of translated books in gold is likely embellished. The scale of support was very real. Greek, Persian, and Indian texts flooded into Baghdad. It was here that algebra was formalized as a discipline by al-Khwarizmi. It was here that Ibn al-Haytham pioneered experimental optics. They didn't just translate Euclid and Archimedes. They corrected errors, added commentary, and extended their work. The crucial difference was synthesis. Islamic scholars didn't just copy. They looked at texts from Greece, India, Persia, and China and created something new. They adopted the Indian numeral system and refined the concept of zero, transforming mathematics. They invented new instruments for astronomy. They made advances in medicine that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries. In many ways, they were the true intellectual successors to Alexandria. For roughly 5 centuries, while Europe preserved fragments, the Islamic world advanced. the scientific tradition. Eventually, this knowledge would flow back westward across the Mediterranean, igniting what we now call the Renaissance. But how exactly did these texts travel from the Islamic world to Christian Europe coming up? The remarkable story of cultural translation in medieval Spain, and how this new ancient knowledge shaped minds like Leonardo da Vinci and Copernicus. The legacy and the new library. Beginning in the 11th century, the intellectual barriers began to break down through the cultural crossroads of medieval Spain and Sicily, where Christian, Muslim and Jewish scholars worked side by side. Forgotten texts flooded back into Europe. But they arrived with a crucial difference enhanced by centuries of Islamic scholarship. Europeans didn't just recover Aristotle and Euclid, they received improved versions with Arabic commentaries and corrections. The introduction of algebra and Arabic numerals, including the concept of zero, fundamentally transformed European mathematics. Without these translations from the Islamic world, the complex calculations that enabled Renaissance banking, navigation, and astronomy simply wouldn't have been possible. These rediscovered texts became intellectual kindling. They challenged the narrow theological focus of medieval scholarship and revived the ancient Alexandrian ideal, knowledge pursued through rational inquiry and empirical observation. The Renaissance gave the West both ancient wisdom and the will to explore. Next, we show exactly how these preserved mathematical principles allowed Copernicus to revolutionize our understanding of the cosmos. The Renaissance wasn't merely a rebirth of art, it was a rediscovery of the Alexandrian spirit of inquiry. Scholars began to question everything: the cosmos, the human body, the principles of engineering, and they did so using tools preserved for over a millennium. Look at the foundations of the scientific revolution: Euclidean geometry, preserved through Arabic translations, Archimedes' principles of mechanics and hydrostatics, recovered from Byzantine and Islamic sources, Ptolemaic astronomy, eventually overthrown by Copernicus, but using mathematical methods derived from that same tradition. The intellectual chain connecting ancient Alexandria to Renaissance Europe was never truly broken. It was just hidden and rerouted for 1,000 years. The printing press, invented in the 15th century, ensured that once a text was recovered, it could never be truly lost again. Knowledge became democratized. The accumulated wisdom of Alexandria, Byzantium and Baghdad became the foundation upon which Galileo, Newton, and countless others built the modern scientific worldview. But the story doesn't end in the past in a moment. We travel to modern Alexandria to see an ambitious attempt to reclaim that ancient vision and discover what lessons the original library's fate still holds for our digital age. The story of the Library of Alexandria follows a cycle: glory, loss, and rediscovery. In 2002, on a site near where the ancient library once stood, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina opened its doors to the world. We weren't trying to replace the original. That would be impossible. We were reclaiming its founding idea. That knowledge belongs to all humanity and must be preserved, shared and continuously expanded. This library is both a memorial and a promise to never again let the flames of war or ignorance consume our collective wisdom. The modern Bibliotheca houses millions of books and is a hub for digitization projects aimed at preserving endangered texts. It represents the ultimate response to the tragedy of the ancient library redundancy, digital backup, global sharing. In our interconnected age, no single fire can erase what we know. Yet the ancient library's destruction teaches us something beyond the simple need for preservation. It reminds us that knowledge is fragile, that political instability and ideological conflicts can set back human progress by centuries. What we've rebuilt isn't just a library, it's a commitment. The texts of Alexandria, those that survived the flames and those that didn't, shape the world we inhabit. From the geometry that built our cities to the astronomy that took us to the moon, we are all inheritors of that ancient vision. The question isn't whether the library's knowledge was dangerous or miraculous. It's whether we'll honor its legacy by keeping inquiry alive. The search for knowledge continues, and this time we're making sure the fire can never win again.